A merchant in Mesopotamia once traded silver with a stranger from the Indus Valley, and neither was cheated. This was the power of a hidden language that connected the ancient world. You are about to discover how simple sticks and stones, the first measurement standards, silently wove scattered civilizations into a single economic tapestry. By the end of this journey, you will understand the true origin of our globalized world. How did a stone weight from Babylon hold the same value as one in Egypt? What forgotten agreements allowed a ship's cargo to be trusted from one foreign port to the next? We will uncover the artifacts and the ingenuity that built history's first marketplace. What does it truly take to build trust between strangers separated by 1,000 miles? That trust had to be built on something more solid than a handshake. Picture two farmers at the edge of their villages. One offers a sack of barley, the other a length of woven cloth. Without a shared understanding of value, this simple trade becomes a tense negotiation. What is a sack? Is it heaping or barely full? How long is a length of cloth? When my handful of grain is smaller than your handful, resentment builds. Commerce cannot flourish in this soil of suspicion. This was the fundamental problem facing every growing society. The solution was not a new type of money, but a new way of thinking. They needed to invent the very idea of a standard. Imagine the profound mental leap this required. It meant moving from the personal and immediate, like the span of a man's hand or the weight he could carry, to the abstract and universal. A standard unit had to mean the same thing for everyone, everywhere, regardless of who was holding it. This was the birth of a powerful concept, an agreement that transcended individual interpretation. The first civilizations realized that for trade to expand beyond the local marketplace, they needed a language of value that was as precise as it was shared. This silent agreement, etched into stone and metal, would become the true currency of the ancient world. A king's seal carved into a block of stone could calm a marketplace and settle a debt from 100 miles away. In Mesopotamia, this was the power of the shekel, a word that meant simply weight but represented a revolution. It was not a coin but a promise, a unit of trust made solid by royal authority. The palace and temple decreed the standard to bring order to the chaos of countless local measures, ensuring that a tax paid in one city was equal to a tax collected in another. Imagine the weight stones carefully carved from durable diorite and bearing the inscription of the ruler. When a merchant placed one of these stones on a scale, they were not just weighing silver or barley, they were invoking the power of the entire kingdom. This was the genius of the system, a portable, verifiable standard that turned abstract value into a tangible fact. With this common language of weight, the economy could evolve in astonishing ways. Cuneiform tablets from the era record loans, contracts, and debts that stretched across city-states, agreements that were enforceable because everyone agreed on what a shekel meant. A farmer could receive credit for seed based on the future weight of his harvest, a concept that would be impossible without that bedrock standard. The Mesopotamian blueprint proved that a shared economic language could unify a civilization, creating a network of trust that allowed commerce to flow as reliably as the Tigris and Euphrates. But how would this powerful idea travel beyond the river valleys, carried to cultures with different rulers and different gods? The royal Cubit was more than a ruler, it was a physical echo of the cosmos. While Mesopotamia built a system of economic trust, Egypt wove measurement into the very fabric of divine order. For the Egyptians, the standard length known as the royal cubit was a sacred gift, believed to be derived from the gods. This was not a simple stick for building, but a meticulously carved rod of black granite. its dimensions a fraction of the Earth's circumference in their understanding of the world. To use this standard was to participate in a celestial harmony. This sacred tool found its purpose in two seemingly separate worlds. With it, architects achieved the breathtaking precision of the pyramids, aligning monumental structures with the stars. Yet that very same cubit was also carried into the muddy fields after the Nile's annual flood. Scribes used it to remeasure farm plots, ensuring every family received a fair portion of land washed away by the waters. This was a profound duty. Priests and officials served as the guardians of these granite standards, and their consistent application was seen as essential for upholding Mat, the universal principle of truth, balance, and justice. A correctly measured field was as vital to cosmic order as a perfectly aligned temple. This fusion of the practical and the profound granted the system an unshakable authority, creating a stability that lasted for millennia. The divine cubit did not just measure stone and soil, it measured a society's alignment with the universe itself. But how could such a spiritually rooted system communicate with the commercially minded merchants of Mesopotamia? A common language of value was still waiting to be found. Far to the east, the cities of the Indus Valley perfected this language of trust without ever writing it down. Here was a civilization that built its greatness not on the commands of a king, but on a silent, pervasive agreement. Walk through the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa, and you will find bricks, millions of them, all sharing the same perfect proportions. This was not an accident. It was a consensus so powerful it spanned a territory larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. The true genius, however, lies in what they left behind: small polished stones that tell a story of mathematical brilliance. Their weights, carved from durable chert, follow an elegant and precise system. A small unit was doubled and doubled again, creating a binary progression that then seamlessly shifted into a decimal system for larger amounts. Can you grasp the sophistication of this? A merchant in a distant port, perhaps on the coast of Oman, could trust the weight presented by an Indus trader without a single shared word between them. The scale would balance perfectly every time. This was a network of trade built on unspoken, yet universally understood rules. Without deciphered texts, we cannot know their laws or their leaders. We only have the artifacts, and they shout a powerful truth. This was a society unified not by a top-down decree from a palace, but likely by a shared cultural vision that valued harmony and commercial efficiency above all. A powerful merchant class may have enforced these standards across the vast river network, creating a bottom-up system of trust that required no central authority. Their legacy is a profound enigma, a testament to the fact that a shared measure can weave a civilization together even in the absence of an emperor's voice. So how did these three distinct worlds, with their royal shekels, divine cubits, and silent stone weights, finally begin to speak the same economic language? The answer lies not on land but out on the open sea. The sea was the great connector, and bronze was its language. To forge this vital alloy, two distant elements had to meet: tin from the misty hills of Cornwall or the high passes of Afghanistan, and copper from the great mines of Cyprus. These raw materials traveled thousands of miles on ships crewed by people who shared no common tongue, no common gods. Their cooperation relied on a simple, physical truth: a standard shape and weight for a metal ingot. The wreck of the Uluburun ship, lying deep off the coast of Turkey, is a time capsule of this first global supply chain. Its hold was filled with copper ingots, each cast in the same distinctive oxide shape, a form that was not just practical for carrying, but was a universally recognized brand of purity and weight. A merchant from Mycenaean Greece, an Egyptian official, and a trader from the Levant all understood the value of that single, standardized object. They did not need to negotiate the terms of each trade because the form itself was the contract. This was a system born of pure necessity, an informal but powerful international convention that allowed the Bronze Age world to function. The insatiable demand for bronze did more than arm soldiers and create art. It effectively forged the first pan-regional agreement on measurement, a pragmatic cooperation that wove the Mediterranean and the Near East into a single, interdependent economy. A Mesopotamian merchant could not read the labels on a shipment of lapis lazuli from a distant mountain mine, yet they accepted its contents without question. Their trust was secured by a small, carved stone cylinder rolled across a clay seal. In a world where written contracts were rare and literacy was not a given, these intricate seals and scarabs became the silent diplomats of international trade. Pressed into a lump of clay securing a sack or a box, the unique impression told a complete story. It identified the sender, guaranteed the purity of the goods inside, and certified that the weight or volume matched the agreed standard. This tiny piece of hardened clay was a legally binding promise. Finding an Egyptian scarab bearing a pharaoh's cartouche in a tomb in Greece is more than a curiosity. It is evidence of a shipment that traveled over 1,000 miles, its contents verified and accepted based solely on the authority of that symbol. These artifacts functioned as both a brand logo and a certified barcode, a non-verbal language that every trader, regardless of their spoken tongue, could understand. The system relied on a shared respect for the authority behind the seal, whether it was a powerful merchant guild, a temple, or a royal official. To break that seal was to break a bond of trust that spanned continents, a risk few would take in the tightly knit world of early commerce. This portable trust allowed goods to flow along established routes with breathtaking efficiency, creating a web of economic connections that required no common alphabet, only a common interest in fair dealing. But what happened when this delicate system of seals and measures faced collapse, when the entire interconnected world it helped build began to fracture? The silent contract of the bronze ingot found its perfect partner in the humble clay jar. Across the wine-dark sea of the Mediterranean, the amphora became the floating heartbeat of commerce, a volumetric standard that scaled trade to an industrial level. These were not mere pots, each one a marvel of engineering with its pointed base for stable stacking in a ship's hull and twin handles for easy carrying. More importantly, they were predictable. A merchant in the port of Rome knew that an amphora from a certain region, with its distinct shape and size, held a precise volume of olive oil or fine wine. This knowledge transformed a ship's cargo from a chaotic assortment into a quantifiable, and therefore bankable, asset. Loading and unloading became a streamlined process, a simple matter of counting standardized units rather than laboriously measuring each container's contents. This was the ancient world's version of containerization, a logistical revolution baked in clay. The system's brilliance extended all the way to the tax collector on the dock. A customs official could assess the duty owed on a shipment with a glance, simply by counting the number of amphorae and applying the known tariff per jar. This efficiency lowered costs and reduced disputes, fueling a cycle of growth that connected the vineyards of Greece to the granaries of Egypt. The amphora did not just carry goods, it carried certainty, making the vast and unpredictable sea as manageable as a local marketplace. That silent contract of the clay jar found its ultimate expression in the hands of two great seafaring peoples. The Greeks and Phoenicians did not merely trade goods, they traded an entire system of trust, carrying it across the Mediterranean in their ships and planting it in every new colony they established. The Phoenician shekel, a direct descendant of the Mesopotamian weight standard, became the common tongue for gold and silver from the coast of Lebanon to the Pillars of Hercules. It was a unit so trusted that a merchant in a fledgling outpost like Carthage could accept payment in these weights, confident they would be honored back in the great trading hub of Tyre. This was a network built on portable, verifiable value. The Greeks observed this system and then refined it with philosophical precision. Independent city-states like Aegina and Athens began stamping pieces of precious metal with their own distinctive symbols, a turtle or an owl, effectively guaranteeing both the purity and the weight of the metal. This was the brilliant innovation of coinage, but the underlying principle was ancient, a trusted, verified unit of value. Yet these were not unified standards, they were competitors. The Athenian stater vied for dominance with the Aeginetan turtle, creating a dynamic marketplace of measurement itself. Merchants would naturally gravitate toward the coinage that was most widely recognized and reliably minted, forcing city-states to maintain strict quality control or see their economic influence wane. This competition did not fracture trade, it forged stronger, more reliable benchmarks. The entire Mediterranean became a melting pot of measurement, where Phoenician weight systems met Greek volumetric standards for wine and oil, creating powerful new hybrids. This synthesis spread through commerce and colonization, wove a denser and more resilient web of economic trust, one that could survive the rise and fall of any single empire. While the Greeks and Phoenicians built networks of trust through commerce, a new power was rising in the East with a far more ambitious vision. The Achaemenid Persian Empire did not simply trade across regions. It unified them into a single, seamless economic organism stretching from the Nile to the Indus River. This was an administrative feat of staggering scale, and its secret weapon was a universal language of measurement imposed from the top down. The king's decree established official standards for weight and volume that were non-negotiable across the entire empire. Imagine a merchant traveling the famed Royal Road, a highway of over 1,500 miles. At every royal station, the measures for grain and silver remained identical, a consistency that transformed a journey through dozens of cultures into a single, predictable transaction. The kash, a unit of weight, and the artaba, a unit of volume, became as vital to imperial function as the army itself. These were the true currencies of administration, allowing officials in Egypt to calculate a tax obligation that would be understood and accepted in Babylon. This was not merely about convenience, it was about control and prosperity. By eliminating the friction of countless local measures, the empire dramatically boosted its own wealth through efficient taxation while simultaneously fueling trade on a continental scale. The Persian model demonstrated a profound truth that a single, enforced economic language could bind a mosaic of peoples into the most powerful and prosperous entity the world had yet seen. But what happens when such a vast, top-down system suddenly shatters, leaving a power vacuum across half the known world? Yet the collapse of such a vast empire did not plunge trade into darkness. Instead, a new, more resilient network began to pulse along the dusty tracks between the deserts, a web of pathways that would one day be known as the Silk Road. Here, no single emperor's decree could dictate the value of a drachm or a djinn. The Silk Road was a living tapestry woven from countless local standards, a vibrant, chaotic, and brilliantly successful marketplace of constantly negotiated value. A merchant from Chang'an calculated his precious silk in Jin and Liang, while his Parthian counterpart, meeting him in a bustling caravanserai, thought in terms of Greek-inspired drachms and staters. For trade to occur, these different economic languages had to be translated in real time. The true heroes of this system were the intermediaries, the multilingual translators, and seasoned caravan masters who held the complex conversion rates in their minds. Their expertise was a form of currency as vital as silver. In the great oasis hubs like Samarkand or Palmyra, you would not find a single universal weight stone. Instead, you would find market officials whose sole job was to act as trusted arbiters, consulting locally accepted conversion tables that were as precious as any spice. The reputation of these trading cities depended entirely on their ability to provide fair and consistent conversions. If a merchant felt cheated in one oasis, the news would travel swiftly with the next caravan, and that hub would wither as traders took their business elsewhere. This created a powerful incentive for honesty. The system thrived not on uniformity, but on a shared commitment to a reliable framework for translation. It was a network of trust built on the fluidity of measurement itself, proving that unification could be a process of constant, intelligent negotiation rather than a single, imposed rule. The Roman legionary did not merely build walls, he built with a universal rhythm. His marching pace, a precise 5 Roman feet, was the same in the damp mist of Britannia as it was under the desert sun of Syria. This was the power of the pes, the Roman foot, a unit that became the skeleton of an empire. Rome understood that true control was not just about legions and laws, it was about imposing a single, unassailable reality of measurement. From the weight of a soldier's pay in silver denarii to the volume of grain in a tax collector's modius basket, every transaction was governed by an imperial standard. Army engineers armed with graduated bronze rods laid out forts and towns with an identical grid, creating a familiar Roman landscape wherever they went. The amphora, perfected by the Greeks, was now produced in Roman kilns to a consistent volume, turning the Mediterranean into a predictable pipeline for oil and wine. And at the heart of it all was the coin, the gold aureus and the silver denarius, each stamped with the emperor's profile and guaranteed to contain a precise weight of pure metal. A merchant in Londinium could accept a denarius with absolute confidence that it would be honored for its full value in Alexandria or Athens. This was more than an economic system, it was a tool of profound assimilation. To use the Roman foot, to trade in Roman pounds, to pay taxes in Roman measures, was to participate in being Roman. It made the vast, sprawling empire administratively manageable and economically cohesive for centuries. Even after the legions withdrew and the empire faded, the ghost of Roman measurement lingered. The libra gave its name to the pound, and the 12-inch foot endured in countless kingdoms, a silent testament to the enduring power of a single, enforced standard to shape the world long after its creators were gone. A king's foot and a farmer's foot were never the same length. This simple, frustrating truth lay at the heart of measurement's greatest challenge. For millennia, the human body itself was the most convenient ruler, a tool everyone carried with them. The Egyptian cubit was the length of a forearm from elbow to fingertip. The foot was just that, and the width of a single finger became a digit. These were brilliantly practical for building a local wall or bartering at a village market. But when you tried to use them to plan a pyramid or settle a trade dispute with a foreign merchant, their inherent variability caused chaos. Your cubit was not my cubit, and trust between distant strangers frayed at the edges. The solution required a profound shift in thinking, a move away from the personal and toward the universal. Civilizations began searching for a standard not found in the body, but written in the stars themselves. The Egyptians may have refined their sacred royal cubit by observing the consistent swing of a pendulum or the fixed arc of a star, linking their architecture to the cosmos. This was the first step on a path that would lead the Greek thinker Eratosthenes to a breathtaking feat. Using standardized distances between Egyptian cities and the angle of the sun's shadow, he calculated the entire circumference of our planet with astonishing accuracy. His experiment was more than a geographical triumph, it was a philosophical revelation. It proved that the entire world, and indeed the heavens, could be measured and understood through a shared, objective language. This was the ultimate goal, to find a unit of measure so fundamental that it was woven into the fabric of reality, a truth that remained constant whether you stood in Athens or Alexandria. The ruler was no longer a bone and muscle but the very turning of the earth. A lump of hematite, cool and dense in the palm, could hold the value of a fortune in silver. This was the true currency of the ancient Near East, not the coins that would come later, but the immutable standard of the shekel weight. In a world where silver itself was the primary money for everything from buying a shipment of tin to paying a king's ransom, trust was everything. The value of a transaction did not come from a stamped face on a piece of metal, but from the precise weight and verified purity of the silver being placed on a scale. Without a universal language of weight, every market would have descended into chaos and dispute. The solution was elegant and absolute official stone weights, meticulously carved from hard, durable materials like hematite or diorite, often inscribed with the seal of a temple or a ruler. When a merchant from the city of Asher prepared a caravan of tin for the long journey to the distant trading post of Coinage in Anatolia, he did not travel with a pre-counted pile of coins. He traveled with his trusted shekel weights. Upon arrival, the Anatolian trader would produce his own set of weights. If both sets were true to the Babylonian standard, the scales would balance perfectly, and the silver would change hands without a single argument over the amount. This was not merely a sale, it was the execution of a contract written in cuneiform weeks or months earlier, a debt settled across 1,000 miles based on a shared belief in a stone's weight. This metallic trust network allowed the Assyrians to establish entire trading colonies in foreign lands, sophisticated commercial outposts where complex, long-term financing and credit became possible. The Babylonian silver standard, enforced by those unassuming blocks of stone, became the silent, indispensable backbone of interregional commerce, a financial language spoken from the deserts of Mesopotamia to the mountains of Anatolia. A Greek stater coin stamped with the image of an eagle could end up in the hands of a Celtic chieftain in distant Gaul. He would not see a foreign currency but a blank canvas. Soon, his own people were minting coins of the exact same weight, yet they covered them with stylized horses and abstract symbols that spoke to their own cultural soul. This was the hidden dimension of measurement, a silent exchange of ideas embedded within the tools of commerce. When a society adopted a foreign standard, it was not just accepting a unit of weight, it was absorbing a fragment of another civilization's mind. The Greek stater carried with it the concept of a city-state's authority and the very idea of stamped, guaranteed value. The Celts, and later kingdoms in northern India, took that underlying framework and made it their own, weaving their own myths and artistic traditions into the metal. The standard provided a common grammatical structure, but each culture wrote its own poetry upon it. This cultural transmission reached far beyond coins. Consider the Mesopotamian sexagesimal system, the base 60 mathematics that gave us our 60-minute hour and 360-degree circle. Its brilliance lay in its divisibility, a practical tool for astronomers and merchants alike. This system did not spread by accident. It traveled along the same routes as Babylonian silver and astronomical tables, adopted by the Greeks and later the entire world because it simply worked better than the alternatives. To measure time and space with base 60 was to unconsciously adopt a piece of the Mesopotamian intellectual legacy. This was the profound, subtle harmonization happening beneath the surface of every caravan and every ship. The tools of trade did more than move goods. They quietly calibrated how different peoples perceived order, value, and the cosmos itself. That sacred trust, carved into stone and stamped on metal, was a constant target. For every authority that worked to impose a fair standard, there was someone seeking to quietly undermine it for personal gain. The history of measurement is in parallel, a history of deception, a timeless struggle between the need for public trust and the temptation of private profit. Ancient texts from across the world, including the Hebrew Bible, explicitly condemn the use of diverse weights and diverse measures, calling such practices an abomination. This was not merely a moral warning, it was a recognition that the entire system of commerce would collapse if trust in the standard was lost. Archaeological evidence brings this conflict to life. Digs in market areas have uncovered what are known as cheetah weights, official-looking stones that were deliberately crafted to be slightly lighter than the true standard. A merchant using such a weight could shave a tiny, almost imperceptible amount from every transaction, slowly amassing illicit wealth while their customers were subtly cheated. This was a silent crime, one that eroded the very foundations of the marketplace. To combat this, societies created a powerful new role, that of the public guardian of fairness. In the bustling agora of a Greek city-state, the agoranomos patrolled the stalls. His duty was to test the scales and the measuring vessels in full view of the people, and without hesitation, he would destroy any tool he found to be false. A similar official, the mutazib, performed this vital function in the Islamic world, ensuring that commercial dealings adhered to both religious law and civic fairness. This eternal cat-and-mouse game between regulators and fraudsters, far from being a sign of failure, actually drove remarkable innovation. The constant threat of deception pushed craftsmen to new heights of precision. Official weights and measures became more carefully manufactured, often from harder stones that were less prone to wear, and they were frequently sealed with a distinctive stamp or mark that certified their authenticity. The fight for accurate measurement was not a secondary concern, it was a fundamental battle for civic trust. A marketplace where people believed they were being treated fairly was a marketplace that thrived, attracting more merchants and generating more prosperity for the entire community. The integrity of the measure was, therefore, as crucial to the ancient economy as the standard itself. This relentless pursuit of fairness would eventually push human ingenuity to its limits, forcing a search for a standard so perfect and so universal that no human hand could ever corrupt it. The ruler you use to measure a shelf and the scale you step onto each morning are echoes from a world 2,000 years removed. Our modern foot and pound are not arbitrary inventions, they are the living descendants of the Roman pes and libra, units that once governed the construction of forts and the payment of legionaries across a vast empire. This lineage did not end with Rome's fall. It was preserved, adapted, and ultimately packaged into the British imperial system, a collection of measures that sailed across the globe on the ships of trade and conquest. The very mile you drive is a direct inheritance from the Roman mil passus, 1,000 paces of a disciplined soldier. This is not a trivial connection. It reveals how these ancient standards became the bedrock of entire legal and economic structures, dictating the size of a farmer's field, the boundaries of a lord's estate, and the taxes owed to a crown. The deep-seated resistance to the metric system in some parts of the world is about more than mere inconvenience. It is a testament to the powerful, almost subconscious inertia of measurement. These units are not just tools, they are a cultural language, a rhythm of life passed down through countless generations. Our contemporary world, for all its digital precision, still conducts much of its daily business to the beat of that ancient drum. That quest for a perfect, incorruptible standard would find its ultimate expression not in a king's decree, but in the measure of the earth itself. The chaos of the old regime in France, with its thousands of conflicting local measures, became the catalyst for the most ambitious unification project in human history. In the wake of the revolution, a team of brilliant scientists was tasked with a monumental endeavor to create a new system for all people for all time. They turned away from the variable human body and looked to the planet, defining the meter as 1/10,000,000th of the distance from the North Pole to the equator. This was the metric system, born from the Enlightenment ideal that reason and nature could provide a universal language. Its adoption was a slow and deliberate conquest, not by armies, but by sheer logic and utility. Scientists were the first to embrace it, for it provided a consistent framework for discovery that transcended national borders. Soon, engineers and industrialists saw its power, as interchangeable parts and streamlined production became possible on a previously unimaginable scale. This was the same economic advantage the Persians had unlocked, but now scaled to the entire globe. The meter and the kilogram became the silent, indispensable partners of international trade, the modern equivalents of the Bronze Age oxide ingot or the Roman amphora. A shipping container's dimensions are calculated in meters, and its cargo is weighed in kilograms, creating a seamless flow of goods from factory to port to store. This global acceptance is the ultimate fulfillment of that ancient dream, first etched into Mesopotamian stone weights, a universal language of value that allows a product made in Vietnam to be sold in Brazil without confusion or dispute. The metric system is the modern chapter in this age-old story, proving that our deeply interconnected world still rests on the same foundational principle, that trust between strangers begins with a shared measure. A carved hematite weight from a Mesopotamian market looks identical to one found in a royal treasury hundreds of miles away. This is the silent proof, the archaeological echo of a shared economic language. These artifacts, from the polished chert cubes of the Indus Valley to the bronze-scale pans resting in Egyptian tombs, are far more than ancient tools. They are the primary sources for a story that was never written down. An exquisitely marked ivory cubit rod, discovered in the workshop of a craftsman, tells us that the standard was not just a royal abstraction, but a daily reality for the people who built civilizations. The most compelling evidence for this deep unification is the discovery of identical weight standards across vast distances. The mina, a unit of about 500 grams, has been found from the palaces of Mesopotamia to the port cities of the Levant, each carved stone weight matching the other with a consistency that speaks of rigorous enforcement and mutual need. Finding one is a curiosity, but finding dozens, all conforming to the same standard, is as conclusive as a signed peace treaty. Modern technology allows us to interrogate these objects with astonishing precision. Laser scanning can measure their tolerances down to a fraction of a millimeter, revealing a level of craftsmanship that rivals modern precision instruments. Spectrographic analysis can trace the unique mineral signature of the stone itself, telling a second story, not just of trade in goods, but of trade in the very tools of measurement. A weight carved from Anatolian diorite found in a Babylonian market is evidence of a network that traded in certainty itself. These physical objects, cool and dense in a curator's hand, are the tangible remains of an invisible network of agreement, allowing us to reconstruct the intricate web of trust that connected the ancient world. This silent agreement did more than just prevent arguments. It fundamentally reshaped the very mechanics of the ancient economy. Think of every trade not as a simple exchange, but as a miniature business deal with its own hidden costs. Before a single good could change hands, time was spent haggling over the true size of a sack of grain. Energy was expended verifying the purity of silver using unfamiliar weights. And there was always the looming risk of a costly dispute if one party felt cheated. These were the transaction costs, the friction that slowed commerce to a crawl. Standardized measurement acted like a universal lubricant for this entire process. Suddenly, a merchant from afar could approach a foreign market with a newfound confidence. He knew his goods would be assessed using a system he understood, and the local buyer trusted the measures being used. This mutual trust dramatically slashed the time and resources needed to complete a deal. Negotiations became quicker, verification was almost instantaneous, and the likelihood of a bitter dispute plummeted. This reduction in friction had a cascade of positive effects. With lower risks and simpler processes, trade was no longer a daunting gamble but a viable profession for many more people. This encouraged greater specialization, as a region known for its pottery or olive oil could focus entirely on perfecting its craft, confident that its products could be reliably measured and sold across vast distances. Larger, more integrated markets began to form where goods could flow to where they were most valued. This intensified competition, driving innovation and improving quality, while resources like labor and raw materials were allocated with far greater efficiency. The result was a dramatic surge in overall prosperity, a rising tide of wealth lifted by the simple, profound power of a shared measure. That visible mark on a standard weight was the engine behind the invisible hand of the ancient marketplace, quietly guiding resources to their most productive uses and weaving isolated communities into a vibrant, interconnected economy. That authority to define the measure was a power more absolute than any sword. When a king declared the length of the royal cubit or the weight of the shekel, he was not merely issuing a practical decree, he was staking a claim on reality itself. This was the ultimate expression of sovereignty, a divine right made tangible. In Mesopotamia, the Code of Hammurabi opens not with laws against theft or violence, but with a proclamation establishing fair weights and measures. The king presents himself as the shepherd of his people, the one who protects the widow and the orphan from being cheated by the powerful merchant with a heavy hand. By placing official weightstones in the marketplace, stamped with his own seal, he became the visible guarantor of justice. This was brilliant statecraft. The populace, assured of fairness in their daily bread, granted the ruler their loyalty. The temple, as the house of the gods, was the natural guardian of this sacred trust. To store the primary standards within its walls was to declare that economic order was a reflection of cosmic order, and that to tamper with the weights was an offense against the divine. This spiritual economic partnership gave the system an authority that mere force could never achieve. The same principle scaled to the vast machinery of empire. A Persian king collecting tribute from Egypt did not need to understand local customs or languages. His officials simply demanded a set number of artabas of grain from each region, a standardized unit of volume that made the wealth of a continent legible and collectible. The power to measure was, in its most practical form, the power to fund an army, build a capital, and command obedience across thousands of miles. Unifying measurement was not an administrative afterthought. It was the very blueprint for centralization, weaving independent cities and diverse peoples into a single, manageable entity called the state. This control over the economy's fundamental language created a hierarchy as rigid as stone, but it also raised a timeless question. What happens when the people decide the official measure is no longer just? Yet the grand imperial standard was never the whole story. For every official measure stamped with a royal seal, there existed a parallel world of local custom, a quiet but persistent hum of regional identity. Even within the meticulously organized Roman Empire, the ghost of the old ways lingered. While an army engineer used his bronze rod to lay out a new city grid with a perfect Roman foot, a farmer in the next valley might still be measuring his ancestral land with the slightly longer or shorter foot of his grandfather. These were not acts of rebellion, but the deep, stubborn persistence of tradition. Nowhere was this diversity more vibrant and complex than in ancient India. Here, a single marketplace could operate with a dazzling array of standards. The mana used for weighing precious gems was not the same as the drona for measuring heaps of grain, and the krosa that defined a day's journey for a merchant might be different from the one used by a pilgrim. These measures were often tied to specific communities, castes, and even deities, woven into the social and religious fabric of daily life. A standard was not just a tool for commerce, it was a marker of identity. This intricate system resisted any simple top-down homogenization because it served a purpose. Local measures were perfectly adapted to local conditions, the yield of a specific soil, the typical load a person could carry over a familiar mountain path. To erase them was to erase a deep, practical wisdom. The history of measurement, therefore, is not a straight line toward perfect uniformity. It is a constant, fascinating dance between the powerful, unifying language of empire and commerce and the resilient, deeply rooted dialects of the village and the region. This negotiation between the global and the local is a tension we still live with today, a reminder that some forms of measurement are not just about quantity, but about belonging. A merchant could not simply arrive at a foreign port whenever he pleased. His cargo of spices or silk was only as valuable as his ability to meet the caravan master at the oasis on the agreed day, or to catch the seasonal wind that would carry his ship across the sea. This was the next great frontier of unification, the standardization of time itself. Just as a shared cubit measured space, ancient civilizations needed a shared calendar to measure the passage of seasons and years. The Egyptians, with their deep connection to the Nile's annual flood, developed a solar calendar of 365 days, a practical tool that allowed them to predict the coming of the waters that fertilized their fields. This predictability was the bedrock upon which they could plan the harvest, store surplus grain, and schedule the great trade fairs that followed. Far to the east, the Babylonians perfected a more complex lunisolar calendar, weaving together the cycles of the moon and the sun. This system was not just for religious festivals, it was vital for commerce. By tracking the stars, Babylonian astronomers could forecast the seasonal shifts, including the monsoon winds that powered the maritime trade between India and the Arabian Peninsula. A ship captain knowing the monsoon was due could plan a voyage with confidence, turning a dangerous gamble into a scheduled journey. But coordinating a single day was not enough. The day itself had to be divided. The Egyptians are credited with first dividing the day and night into 24 equal hours, a concept they developed using water clocks and sundials to mark the passage of time for temple rituals. The Greeks later embraced and refined this idea, creating more precise mechanical timekeeping devices. Why did this matter for a merchant in a dusty port? Because a contract could now stipulate that a ship would depart at the third hour of the day, or that laborers would be paid from the opening of the market at a specific time until its closing. This created a new layer of certainty, synchronizing the daily activities of thousands of people across a city. A shared understanding of time became the invisible schedule that coordinated the entire ancient economy. It ensured that the camels were loaded when the caravan was ready to move, that the docks were staffed when the ships were due to arrive, and that partners separated by months of travel could still trust in a meeting set for a specific future date. This temporal unification was the silent partner to the spatial standardization of weights and lengths, weaving the dimension of time into the same fabric of predictability that made complex, long-distance trade not just possible but profitable. A standardized brick is a practical tool, but a pyramid aligned with the stars is a philosophical statement. This leap from the marketplace to the cosmos was powered by a silent partnership between the merchant's scale and the astronomer's chart. The Babylonians did not just create a system of weights, they perfected the mathematics to make it fluid and precise. Their base 60 arithmetic, which gives us our 60-minute hour, was a stroke of genius for commerce. It allowed a single shekel of silver to be divided effortlessly into halves, thirds, quarters, and even twelfths, settling complex transactions with mathematical elegance. This was not abstract number theory, it was the essential calculus of the ancient bazaar, ensuring every debt could be calculated to the smallest fraction. Across the sea, the Greek geometers took this further. A man like Euclid, laying down the laws of lines and angles in the sand, was providing the intellectual foundation for something profoundly practical, the precise remeasurement of farmland after the Nile's flood. His geometry was the invisible guide ensuring that a farmer's plot, and thus his livelihood, was restored with perfect fairness, but the ultimate clockwork belonged to the heavens. Astronomers staring at the night sky were not merely mapping stars, they were building the calendar that regulated the entire economy. They could predict the monsoon winds that would fill the sails of trade ships and the seasonal floods that dictated the planting and harvest. This celestial timekeeping created the predictable cycles that made long-term contracts and investments possible. The drive for better measurement, in turn, fueled scientific discovery. The need to calculate a ship's position at sea pushed the development of trigonometry. The demand for pure metals forced advances in the chemistry of assaying. This was a virtuous cycle where the practical problems of builders, sailors, and merchants demanded new mathematical tools, and those new tools then enabled a level of precision previously unimaginable. The quest to measure the world did not just support commerce, it fundamentally gave birth to the scientific method itself, transforming human curiosity from observation into a testable, measurable exploration of the universe. From the first carved stone weight in the city of Ur to the digital sensor tracking a cargo container today, this human drive to find a common measure has been one of our most powerful, unifying forces. It was never just about the weight of silver or the length of cloth. These early standards were the silent diplomats of a fractured world, building fragile bridges of trust across deserts and seas. They forged a common language of value that allowed a Mesopotamian merchant and an Indus Valley trader to strike a deal without sharing a single spoken word. This was the true first flowering of a global economy. The profound lesson etched into every ancient weight and measure is simple, yet it reshaped history. For people to exchange goods, they must first agree on a common reality. This story of how early standards unified the ancient world is far more than a historical curiosity. It is the origin story of our own deeply interconnected existence. It stands as a timeless reminder that cooperation and mutually agreed upon rules are not abstract ideals, they are the very bedrock of shared prosperity. The next time you glance at a ruler or step on a scale, consider the immense journey of collaboration and trust embedded within that simple act of measurement. What other hidden agreements make our modern world possible? Share your thoughts on this monumental human achievement in the comments, and as always, thank you for exploring these foundations with us.